Listen closely. Can you hear it? That is not the sound of a market crashing. It is not the sound of a protest march or the roar of a political revolution. It is the sound of silence. A silence so profound, yet so widespread, that it has become the loudest alarm bell in the modern world. Right now, beneath the surface of the global economy, a massive invisible event is taking place. It is happening behind the closed doors of bedrooms in Tokyo, in the basements of suburban homes in Ohio, and in small darkened apartments in Shenzhen. It is a quiet strike. There are no banners, no leaders, and no lists of demands. Yet the participants in this strike number in the tens of millions. They are young, able-bodied men who have made a radical decision. They are checking out, they are not working, they are not looking for work. They are not dating, they are not marrying, and they are not buying homes. For decades, economists ignored them. They were dismissed as outliers, or simply labeled as lazy. But when you look at the raw data, the curve is undeniable. We are witnessing a structural collapse in the fundamental engine that has driven human civilization for centuries. The motivation of the young male to build, to provide, and to compete. This is not just a social quirk, it is an economic time bomb. If the labor force is the muscle of an economy, then these men are the atrophy. And the question we must ask is not just why are they doing this, but rather, what happens to the world when half of the population decides the game is no longer worth playing? To understand this phenomenon, we have to look past the stereotypes. You might know them by different names depending on where you look. In Japan, they are the hikikomori, the recluses who haven't left their rooms in years. In China, they are the practitioners of tangping, or lying flat, a generation refusing to participate in the grueling 9 and 96 work culture. In the West, they are the NEETs, not in education, employment, or training. But these are just symptoms of a single unifying pathology. The social contract has been broken. For generations, there was an unwritten deal between society and its men. The deal was simple. Sacrifice your time, your health, and your freedom to the labor market, and in exchange, you will be granted access to a life of stability, ownership, and family. It was a transaction. You put in labor, you got out a life. But in the 21st century, the math of that transaction has changed. The cost of entry into the middle class has skyrocketed, while the rewards for participation have stagnated. When an investor looks at a business deal where the costs outweigh the returns, they don't invest. They walk away. Today, millions of men are looking at the deal of modern life, calculating the return on investment and realizing it is negative. So they are doing what any rational investor would do. They are pulling their capital, their labor, and their lives out of the market. This didn't happen overnight. To truly grasp the magnitude of this shift, we have to look back at the historical benchmarks that defined success, and the moment those benchmarks began to crumble. Rewind the clock to the United States in the 1950s. This era is often mythologized, but strip away the nostalgia and look at the economics. A young man in 1955 could graduate high school, walk into a factory job with no prior experience, and earn a wage that could support a wife, 3 children, a car, and a detached house. He didn't need to be exceptional. He just needed to participate. The labor force participation rate for prime age men, those between 25 and 54, was nearly 98%. Almost every man who could work was working. Why? Because the system worked for them. The link between effort and reward was visible, tangible, and immediate. Participation was the winning strategy. Now, fast forward to a different time and place, Japan, the 1990s. This is where the cracks first appeared. Japan was the envy of the world in the 80s, but when their massive asset bubble burst in 1991, it triggered what is now known as the lost decade. But it wasn't just the economy that was lost, it was the men. As the promise of lifetime employment evaporated and asset prices remained out of reach, a new breed of man emerged. They were derisively called herbivore men, Soshoku Danshi. These were men who had no interest in career advancement, no interest in buying cars, and shockingly, no interest in pursuing romantic relationships. At the time, Western economists laughed. They thought this was a uniquely Japanese cultural quirk. They were wrong. Japan wasn't an anomaly, it was a preview. It was a canary in the coal mine. Japan showed us exactly what happens when an economic environment becomes hostile to the traditional male role. When the ladder of mobility is pulled up, men don't just stand at the bottom and complain. They walk away from the ladder entirely. Today, that same pattern has gone viral globally. The herbivore phenomenon is no longer Japanese. It is the default setting for millions of men across Europe and North America who have realized that the 1950s promise is dead, but they are still being asked to pay the 1950s price of admission. So, if history shows us when this started, we need to analyze why it is accelerating now. If we strip away the noise, we can identify 3 distinct forces, 3 pincers, that are crushing the motivation of the modern man. The first pincer is the economic squeeze. We mentioned the 1950s worker. Compare him to today. Adjusted for inflation, wages for non-college educated men have barely budged, or in some cases dropped, over the last 40 years. Meanwhile, the big three expenses, housing, education, and healthcare, have exploded in cost. Today, a median income cannot buy a median home in almost any major Western city. The role of the provider, historically the central pillar of male identity, is mathematically impossible for a huge swath of the population. When a game is rigged so that you cannot win, the only winning move is not to play. The second pincer is the environment gap. We have completely transformed our educational and professional environments over the last 30 years. Schools today are designed around compliance, stillness, and verbal proficiency, areas where, statistically, young girls tend to outperform young boys. Boys, who often learn through competition, risk, and kinetic activity, increasingly find themselves drugged for being hyperactive or penalized for being disruptive. They fall behind early. By the time they reach adulthood, they are less educated than their female peers. This creates a cultural mismatch. We have a generation of men entering a knowledge economy that they feel wasn't built for them, and they are opting out of education at record rates because they don't see the payoff. The third pincer is perhaps the most dangerous because it is the most seductive, the dopamine trap. In the 1970s, if a man was unemployed, lonely, and bored, it was an agonizing state of existence. That agony was a biological signal telling him to get up, go out, and hunt for resources or a mate. Misery was the engine of action. Today, if a man is lonely and bored, he has a supercomputer in his pocket. He has video games that provide a sense of achievement, leveling up, and status that the real world denies him. He has pornography that provides a vivid simulation of sexual intimacy with zero risk of rejection and zero cost. He has social media algorithms that feed his outrage or his tribalism. Technology has created a cheap substitute for real life. Why suffer the humiliation of a job interview, the sting of romantic rejection, or the grinding effort of saving for a house you can't afford when you can be a king in the virtual world for free? The virtual world offers a better immediate return on investment than the real one. This brings us to the present day. The quiet strike is no longer a fringe issue. It is showing up in the cold, hard macroeconomic data. In the United States, the labor force participation rate for prime-age men has been in a secular decline for over half a century. We are currently missing roughly 7 to 9 million men from the workforce who, historically speaking, should be there. Walk through any major city and you see help wanted signs. You see construction projects delayed. You see a supply chain crisis. We are told there is a labor shortage, but we don't have a shortage of people. We have a shortage of willing participants. But the impact goes beyond GDP. The economic withdrawal is fueling a mating crisis. We are witnessing the sex recession. The percentage of men under 30 who report having 0 sexual partners has tripled in the last decade. Marriage rates are plummeting. Birth rates in almost every developed nation have fallen below the replacement level of 2.1. This creates a terrifying feedback loop. Men don't work hard because they don't have families to support. Because they don't work hard, they don't have the resources to start families. And because they don't start families, the economy shrinks, opportunities vanish, and the cycle repeats. We are watching a demographic winter set in. The lost men are not just lost to the economy, they are lost to the future of the species. They are the genetic dead ends of their family lines and the economic dead weight on a system that relies on growth to survive. If we project this trend forward, if we assume nothing changes, where do we end up in 10 years? The forecast is bleak. We are heading toward a bifurcated society. On one side, you will have a hyper-productive elite, both men and women, who own the capital, the robots, and the AI. On the other side, you will have a vast underclass of lost men subsisting on some form of universal basic income or parental support, living entirely in the metaverse. They will be sedated by cheap digital entertainment, removed from the physical world. But history teaches us a brutal lesson. You cannot sedate biology forever. A society with a large population of unattached, purposeless, and economically hopeless men is a powder keg. Throughout history, this demographic has been the primary source of political instability, revolution, and war. When men feel they have no stake in society, nothing to build, nothing to protect, and no legacy to leave behind, they become susceptible to radicalization. They burn down the village to feel the warmth because they were never invited to sit by the hearth. We are risking a future of extreme political volatility, fueled by the rage of the ignored. Furthermore, the economic consequences will be crushing. Who pays for the pensions of the elderly when the youth don't work? Who maintains the power grid? Who fixes the plumbing? Artificial intelligence might write code, but it doesn't fix a burst pipe in the middle of winter. The infrastructure of our civilization relies on the invisible labor of men who show up to do the dirty, dangerous, and difficult jobs. If they stop showing up, the lights eventually go out. So, how do we stop the bleeding? The answer does not lie in shaming these men. Telling them to man up is like yelling at a plant to grow without giving it water. It ignores the environment. We are at a crossroads. The solution requires a fundamental reconstruction of the pathway to purpose. We need an economy where hard work actually buys dignity and assets again, not just survival. We need an education system that values the unique strengths of male biology rather than pathologizing them. And perhaps most importantly, we need to have an honest conversation about the devastating impact of the digital dopamine loop. The lost men are not broken. They are reacting rationally to a broken system. They are waiting on the sidelines. They have withdrawn their consent to participate in a game they cannot win, but they are still there. The potential energy is massive. If we can fix the incentives, if we can restore the social contract, we could unlock the greatest wave of human potential the world has ever seen. But if we continue to ignore the silence from the empty bedrooms, we may find that by the time we decide to listen, there will be no one left to answer. This is the reality of the quiet strike. It is the story of the men who disappeared, and why the future of the global economy depends on bringing them back.